The morning sun was still low, painting the fields in long golden shadows. Cade Reardon stood on his porch, a steaming mug in his hand, and watched. He watched the mist rise from the creek. He watched the way the light hit the old oak tree. He watched a hawk circling high above, a tiny speck against the blue. For most people, it was just a pretty view. For Cade, it was a report. Everything was a report. The position of the sun told him the time. The behavior of the birds told him if anything was moving in the woods. The quiet was a sound he listened to very carefully. Inside, the smell of pancakes mixed with the warm, earthy scent of dog. His daughter, Chloe, was at the kitchen table, her feet swinging under her chair. Beside her, taking up a huge amount of the floor, was Bear. Bear was a great Pyrenees, a giant ball of white fur with gentle brown eyes. To Chloe, he was her pillow, her protector, her best friend. To Cade, Bear was the farm's early warning system. He was better than any security camera. "Did you see the new baby chicks, Dad?" Chloe asked, syrup on her chin. Bear licked one and it fell over. It was okay, though. Cade smiled, a real one that softened his eyes. "He's just checking on the livestock. That's his job." He looked at Bear. "Good boy." Bear's tail thumped once on the floor, a heavy, solid sound. Cade's own job that day was fixing the tractor. But first, there was the routine. He washed his mug and placed it back in the exact same cupboard spot. He checked the lock on the basement door, a solid, steel-bolted thing that looked out of place in the old farmhouse. He walked the property line, not because he expected trouble, but because knowing his environment was as natural to him as breathing. He noted a broken branch on the fence. He saw fresh deer tracks near the garden. All normal. All quiet. Later, while Chloe sat in the grass drawing pictures of Bear, Cade worked on the engine. His hands moved with a kind of smooth, efficient certainty. Every tool was picked up and returned to its spot on the rolling cart. There was no wasted movement. It was the way a soldier would fix a tractor, if a soldier ever fixed a tractor. He was a man who had built a world of peace, piece by careful piece, around his little girl. The farm was their fortress. The routine was their safety. Bear was their guard. He never talked about the time before. Chloe only knew her dad had been in the army a long time ago. She saw the faded green duffel bag in the back of his closet. She saw the way he could be perfectly still for a very long time. She saw the bad days, the ones where he would sit on the porch all night, just watching the dark, and Bear would sit pressed against his leg. Those days were rare now. The farm and her had healed him. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, Cade called it a day. He put the tools away, every single one. He watched Chloe run ahead towards the house, Bear trotting happily beside her, his big tail waving like a flag. A feeling, warm and solid, settled in Cade's chest. This was it. This was everything he had fought for, even if Chloe didn't know it. This simple, quiet life. Asterisk, 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 20 miles away, in a cramped, messy office at the sheriff's department, Deputy Vince Croft was bored. He scrolled through social media on his computer, his booted feet up on the desk. He was young, with a sharp haircut and a confidence that was bigger than his experience. He liked action. Traffic stops were okay, but he wanted the big stuff. The stuff that got you noticed. Not an email popped up. It was from a generic, untraceable account. The subject line said, "Urgent, drug operation." Croft sat up, his boredom gone. The email was short. It claimed that out at the old Reardon place on Miller's Creek, they were running a major meth lab. It said the owner was a paranoid ex-military type, heavily armed, and that trucks came and went at all hours. It sounded exactly like the kind of thing Croft had seen on reality police shows. His heart beat a little faster, This could be his ticket. He printed the email and marched into the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dale was an older man, tired around the eyes, who preferred calm to chaos. He read the email slowly, then looked at Croft over his glasses. Reardon? Keeps to himself. Pays his taxes. His little girl goes to the school. This feels thin, Vince. But the tip says it's a big operation, Sheriff. Ex-military, armed. If we go in standard, we could have a firefight. We need the element of surprise. Croft leaned forward. A no-knock. Get in fast before they can destroy evidence or grab weapons. Sheriff Dale rubbed his forehead. The county had been quiet. The commissioners were always asking for results. A big drug bust would look good. And if the tip was right, and someone got hurt because they went in slow, he sighed. The risk of doing nothing felt bigger than the risk of acting. All right, Dale said, the word heavy. But we do it by the book. Full team. At dawn. And for God's sake, Vince, identify yourself clearly. We are not cowboys. The goal is to bring everyone out safe, especially that child. Croft nodded, a thrill running through him. Yes, sir? We'll get it right. He left the office already planning it in his head. The dynamic entry, the shouts of sheriff's department, the shock on the criminals' faces. He didn't think about pancakes, or little girls drawing pictures, or gentle giant dogs. He thought about being a hero. Back at the farm, the night was perfectly dark and quiet. Cade tucked Chloe into bed. Bear flopped down on the rug beside her, sighing contentedly. "Good night, Dad," Chloe murmured, already half asleep, her hand resting on Bear's head. "Good night, sweetheart," Cade whispered. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them. Then he went through the house, checking windows and doors. It wasn't fear. It was procedure. He looked out at the peaceful sleeping land, completely unaware that a decision made in his stuffy office had just put a target on his home and on the heart of everything he held dear. The two worlds, the quiet farm and the impatient department, were on a collision course, and only one man knew a storm was coming. But even he didn't know how terrible it would be. The darkness just before dawn is a special kind of quiet. It was in that deep blue silence that Cade's eyes snapped open. He wasn't jerked awake by a sound, but by a lack of one. The crickets outside his window had stopped. A second later, Bear, who slept at the foot of Chloe's bed, let out a single low woof. Not a bark, but a question. Cade was already moving. His feet hit the floor, and his mind switched from sleep to a terrifying, ice-cold clarity. He moved to the window, not directly in front of it, but to the side, peeling back the curtain a fraction of an inch. There, down by the lower field. No lights, but the silhouette of the old birch tree was wrong. It was blocked. Something large and dark was sitting where nothing should be. A vehicle with its engine off. He saw another shadow move near the fence line. A man. This wasn't kids trespassing. This was an approach. A tactical one. And a poor one they'd come across the field, thinking the open ground gave them an advantage, not realizing it made them visible against the skyline to a man who knew how to look. Every second was a resource now. He padded to Chloe's room. She was still asleep, curled around her pillow. Bear was standing now, head lowered, ears forward, a low rumble in his chest. The dog knew. "Chloe," Cade said, his voice calm but firm. Her eyes fluttered open. "We're playing the quiet game, okay? The super secret one. Right now." Instantly, she was alert. They had practiced this, just like fire drills. She didn't ask questions. She nodded, her eyes wide. He helped her out of bed, wrapped her in her blanket, and led her to the back of her closet. Behind a panel of false shelves was a small, safe space he'd built, lined with soft things, with a light and a vent. He placed her inside. "Bear will stay with you," he whispered. "You stay here until I come get you, no matter what you hear. I love you. I love you, Dad," she whispered back, pulling Bear close. The big dog went willingly, his body shielding hers. Cade closed the panel silently. The house was a tomb. He was a ghost in it. He slipped into a pair of dark pants and a black sweatshirt. He did not go to a gun safe. He did not harm himself. That was not the plan. The plan was to understand, to assess. A weapon now would only define the fight. He needed to see what this was. He melted out the back kitchen door, becoming part of the shadows of the house. The cool air bit his skin. He moved not like a man, but like a thought, from the corner of the house to the old woodpile, from there to the deeper black under the cedar trees. He was upwind, so no dog would catch his scent. He was silent, so no nervous deputy would hear a twig snap. In less than a minute, he was in his observation post, a spot he'd chosen years ago, with a clear view of the front porch and the yard. His heart beat slow and hard in his chest. He saw them now. 4 figures in dark jackets, moving toward the front porch. They were not smooth. They were loud, their gear rattling, their boots crushing gravel. One led, moving fast and eager. The others followed, spread out but clumsy. They gathered at his front door. From the trees, Cade watched. His face showed nothing. It was the calm, focused face of a man reading a map. On the porch, Deputy Croft was breathing hard, adrenaline pumping. This was it. He nodded to the biggest deputy, who held the small battering ram. For the element of surprise, Croft thought. To keep everyone safe, the deputy with the ram swung it hard. The sound of the front door splintering was like a gunshot in the quiet dawn. "Sheriff's Department. Search warrant." Croft yelled. Charging into the dark house. The noise was the trigger. From the hallway, a deep, thunderous bark erupted. Bear, hearing the crash, had left Chloe's side. His job was to guard, and the house was being attacked. A massive shape of white fur filled the hallway, teeth bared, a roar coming from his chest. He wasn't charging to attack. He was placing himself between the threat and the little girl in the closet. To Croft. Bursting into the dark, the world was chaos and noise. A huge, snarling animal was coming right at him in the tight space. All his training evaporated in a flood of pure panic. He didn't see a family pet. He saw a monster. "Get back." He screamed, but the dog didn't stop. Croft stumbled back, his finger tightening on the trigger of his rifle. The 3 shots were incredibly loud. The flashes lit up the hallway for a split second. Bear yelped. A short, surprised sound, and then fell heavily to the floor. A dark stain already spreading on his white fur. Silence rushed back in, ringing and awful. From the tree line, Cade saw it all. He saw the flash from the muzzle. He saw the shape of his daughter's dog fall in the doorway. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. But something inside him, something he had buried under years of quiet mornings and tractor repairs, went very still and very dark. It was like watching a foundation crack. The world didn't end. It just changed color. Inside, the other deputies were frozen. Croft was breathing like he'd just run a mile, the gun smoke in the air. A young deputy whispered, "Oh, God." Then a small, broken sound came from down the hall. A tiny, muffled cry. It was Chloe, who had heard the shots and the yelp. Croft, still shaking, moved forward, pushing past Bear's body. He followed the sound to a bedroom, to a closet. He pulled open the door and saw the false panel, yanked it open. Inside, huddled with her face buried in the blanket, was a little girl. She looked up, her face wet with tears, her eyes filled with a terror that was worse than anything Croft had ever seen. "Where's my dad?" She sobbed. "You hurt Bear. I heard him." At that moment, Sheriff Dale arrived at the broken door, his face pale. He took in the scene, the good dog dead on the floor, the men standing around looking lost, the sound of a child crying. His stomach turned to lead. He knew right then they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. And then a shadow filled the front doorway. Cade walked in. He didn't run. He just stepped over the broken wood, his eyes going first to Bear, then down the hall to where his daughter wept. He walked past the deputies as if they weren't there. He knelt in front of the closet, his back to them all. "Chloe," he said, his voice soft, a complete contrast to the violence in the air. "Daddy." "Bear, they hurt Bear," she wailed, throwing herself into his arms. "I know, sweetheart. I know." He held her tight, his face buried in her hair. Over her shoulder, his eyes were open. They looked at the deputies, at Croft, at the sheriff. There was no rage there, no screaming threat. There was nothing. It was the empty, flat look of a predator assessing prey. It was a promise, written in ice dot. He stood, lifting Chloe, turning her face away from Bear's body. He walked back toward the door. Sheriff Dale found his voice. "Sir Cade." There was a tip. We had a warrant, we thought. Cade stopped. He looked at the sheriff. Then his gaze locked on Deputy Croft, memorizing every detail of his face. His voice, when it came, was quiet, calm, and carried the weight of a coming storm. "You will handle this." Then he walked out into the rising sun, carrying his crying daughter, leaving the broken door and the broken dog, and the beginning of a terrible understanding behind him. The raid was over. Something else had just begun. The next few days on the farm were covered in a thick, heavy silence. It was worse than noise. The kind of quiet where you notice every little sound that's missing, the jingle of a dog tag, the sound of big paws padding across the floorboards, the happy sigh from the corner of the room. Chloe didn't want to draw. She didn't want to go see the baby chicks. She sat on the porch swing, her knees pulled up to her chest, staring at the spot under the old oak tree where they had buried Bear. She had wrapped him in his favorite blanket. Her dad had dug the hole, deep and straight, his face like stone. He didn't cry. He just worked, and when he was done, he held her for a long time. The sheriff's department left messages. A man from the county came by with a letter in an official envelope. Cade took it from him at the door without a word and placed it, unopened, on the kitchen table. It sat there like a dead thing. One afternoon, Sheriff Dale himself drove up. He got out of his car slowly, like he was tired. He took off his hat and walked to the porch where Cade was fixing a hinge. Chloe watched from the window. "Cade," the sheriff said. There aren't words. It was a terrible mistake. The tip was bad. My deputy panicked. We're placing him on paid administrative leave, pending a full review." Cade kept working, a screwdriver turning in his hand. He didn't look up. "The county," the sheriff continued, swallowing hard, "wants to make a gesture for the loss of your property." He held out a check. It was for $500. That's when Cade stopped. He put the screwdriver down. He finally looked at the sheriff, and the older man took a small step back. The look wasn't angry. It was empty. It was the look of someone measuring the distance to the horizon. "You shot my daughter's heart in my hallway," Cade said, his voice quiet and even. "And you think that's the price?" "It's not like that," the sheriff started, but the words died in his mouth. He put the check on the porch step. "The process. It has to run its course." "Your process is over," Cade said. He picked up his tools and went inside, closing the door softly. Later, after he had read Chloe a story and waited until her breathing became the slow rhythm of sleep, Cade moved. He went to the basement door, unlocked the 3 heavy bolts, and walked down the stairs. It wasn't a basement for storage. There were no old boxes or washing machines. The walls were plain concrete. In the center of the room was a simple metal desk. On it sat a single sleek laptop, unlike any you could buy in a store. There was a small locked cabinet bolted to the wall. He sat in the chair. For a long moment, he just stared at the dark screen. He saw Chloe's empty eyes. He saw the check on the step. He saw the eager, panicked face of the deputy on his porch. He opened the laptop. It didn't have a brand name. When it powered on, it asked for a series of passwords, then a scan of his fingerprint, then a code from a small device he took from the cabinet. The screen came to life. This was the other man. The man the farmer had buried. The operator. He began to work, his fingers moving over the keyboard without sound. First, he found the sheriff's department's internal network. It was like a rickety fence to him. He was inside it in minutes. He didn't wreck anything. He just looked. He read the incident report about the raid. It was full of words like perceived threat and dynamic entry and regrettable outcome. Deputy Croft's name was all over it. He found Croft's personnel file. He saw his birthday, his address, his bank, his social security number. He found the other deputies who were there that morning. He found their schedules, their patrol routes. He found the email tip. He traced it back, not through normal ways, but through paths only someone with his training knew existed. It led to a computer at the public library used a week ago. He accessed the library's security footage from that day, a silent black and white movie. He watched people come and go. And then he saw him. A man he recognized. Their neighbor to the east, a bitter man with a narrow face who had been arguing about the property line for years. The man who had waved a fist and shouted, "You'll be sorry." Cade had just walked away then. Now he saved the video clip. He leaned back. The information glowed in front of him. Names, numbers, routines, lives. This was his battlefield map. He wasn't planning to hurt them. Not physically. That was the old way, and that man was gone. This was about consequence. The system had given Croft a vacation and offered $500 for a little girl's shattered world. It had declared that value. Cade was going to show them the real cost. He would dismantle their sense of safety, just as they had dismantled his. He would show them what it felt like when the world you trusted suddenly turned against you, when the rules you hid behind stopped working. He started with Croft, not with a threat, but with a correction. He accessed the deputy's online banking. With a few keystrokes, he diverted every single payment, the mortgage, the car loan, the credit card, to pay themselves off. He moved Croft's savings into a holding account he created. To the bank's computers, it would look like Croft had simply logged in and paid all his bills. The bank balances dropped to zero. Next, he went into the department's internal commendation system. He wrote a new entry for Deputy Croft. It described, in glowing, ridiculous detail, how Croft had single-handedly rescued a basket of kittens from a tree while off duty, showing bravery and compassion above and beyond. He backdated it and filed it. It would pop up on the sheriff's desk in the morning. Finally, he looked at the neighbor, the tipster. He thought for a moment. Then, a very small, very cold smile touched his lips. He began to research the man's life, his own personal map of pressure points. Upstairs, Chloe cried out in her sleep. The sound, faint through the floor, snapped him out of it. He closed the laptop, locked the cabinet, and went back up to the world of light. He checked on her, smoothing her hair. She was dreaming, her face troubled. He walked to the living room window and looked out at the night. The farm was quiet. But the war was no longer outside. It was in him, and it had just begun. The quiet farmer was gone for now. In his place was the strategist, the ghost in the machine, ready to teach a lesson in loss to the men who thought they understood it. He would use their own world, their money, their rules, their pride to break them. And he would do it without ever leaving his land. The confusion began slowly, like the first few drops of a cold rain. For Deputy Croft, it started with his phone. It buzzed with a notification from his bank. Payment confirmed, mortgage. He was having coffee, trying to forget the sound of the dog's yelp that still echoed in his dreams. He frowned. His mortgage wasn't due for another 2 weeks. He opened the app. His stomach dropped. His savings account, the one with over $8,000 he'd been saving for a new truck, showed a balance of $0.00. His checking account had $12 in it. But the transactions, they were all there. His car payment, his credit card bill, his insurance all marked paid in full. It looked like he had done it, but he hadn't. He called the bank. They told him the payments were made online from his verified account late last night. They were polite but firm. The system showed he had logged in and paid everything. He must have forgotten. He sputtered, panicking. They suggested he change his password at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dale was looking at a printed report on his desk with a deep sense of unease. It was a commendation for Deputy Croft, for feline rescue and outstanding community compassion. It was written in the official style, but it was nonsense. It was signed with his own digital authorization code. He knew he hadn't written it. He called the IT guy, a young man named Phil who handled their computers. Phil looked it over, puzzled. "It's in the system, Sheriff. Logs show it was filed from your computer last night at 11:23 p.m., but I was at home in bed," the sheriff said, his voice rising. Phil just shrugged, helpless. "The system doesn't lie." Then the other calls started to come in. The deputy who had driven the raid vehicle woke up to find his personal SUV, a big 4-wheel drive, wasn't in his driveway. His heart leaped to his throat stolen. He called it in, frantic. An hour later, a town worker called from the city park. You guys gonna come get this thing?" The deputy raced over. His SUV was there, parked perfectly in the middle of the children's playground. But it was different. It had been taken apart, not wrecked. It was meticulously disassembled. The tires were stacked neatly beside it. The doors were off and leaning against the slide. The engine, the seats, the dashboard, all laid out in orderly rows on the grass, like a giant puzzle. Every bolt, every screw, was placed carefully in little sorted containers. It was impossible. It would have taken a team of mechanics hours. And no one had seen or heard a thing. Fear, cold and slick, began to creep through the department. This wasn't normal. This wasn't vandals. This was something else. The neighbor who had sent the tip, a man who spent more time complaining than farming, had his own surprise. He was a man who loved his possessions, especially his classic car, a bright red muscle car from the 1970s. It was his pride. He kept it in a locked garage. One morning, he went out to get the mail and stopped dead. The car was gone. In its place, sitting in the driveway, was a child's toy pedal car, painted the same shade of red. He let out a strangled shout, looking around wildly. Then he looked up. His real car was in the big maple tree at the edge of his property. It was perched 20 feet in the air, cradled perfectly in the strong fork of 2 massive branches. It wasn't dropped there. It was placed. There was no damage. How? A helicopter? No one heard a thing. He called the sheriff's department, screaming about trespassing and theft. When a deputy came out and saw the car in the tree, he just stared, his face pale. He radioed it in, his voice shaky. "You're not going to believe this." Back at the farm, life appeared normal. Cade made Chloe pancakes. He helped her plant some flowers near Bear's grave-bright sunflowers, because they were tall and happy. He was present, but he was quiet. His mind was elsewhere, working the problem. The final stroke was the most public and the most humiliating. Every day at noon, the sheriff's office had a small press briefing for the local news channel, mostly about traffic and community events. The feed was managed from a single computer in the briefing room. At exactly noon that day, Sheriff Dale stood in front of the camera. He was about to discuss a new speed limit sign on Main Street. The red light on the camera came on. He opened his mouth, but his voice didn't come out. Instead, loud, cheerful cartoon music blared through the station's speakers. On the screen behind him, and on every television tuned to the broadcast, the serious face of the sheriff was replaced by a silly, bouncing cartoon of a singing kitten wearing a tiny sheriff's hat. The song was about being kind to animals. In the office, deputies stood frozen, watching monitors that now showed only the cartoon. The IT guy, Phil, slammed his keyboard, his face red with effort and terror. "I can't stop it. It's locked. It's locked." The broadcast lasted for 90 seconds. Then it cut off, and the system reset itself as if nothing had happened. The silence in the office was total. The sheriff walked slowly back to his office, not looking at anyone. He closed the door and sat down. His hands were trembling. This wasn't a prank. This was a demonstration, a show of absolute, terrifying power. They were being toyed with by someone who could walk through their digital walls, move heavy objects like ghosts, and make them look like fools in front of the whole town. And they all knew who it was. They all thought of the quiet man with the empty eyes,